It is no mistake that human beings feel sadness and grieve and shed tears. It is a vital capacity that evolved over countless thousands of years to help us survive and adapt to the changing conditions of our lives. Grief is the deep sadness and heartbreak and tearfulness we experience when we go through a major loss. Its evolutionary purpose is to help us process and accept losses so we can move forward with our lives. When we go through a major loss, like the death of someone close to us, or the end of a relationship, or we lose some part of our identity, or a pet, or our health, or a dream that we've been holding close to our hearts for many years, it hurts, and it can hurt to the very marrow of our bones. The deep emotional attachments we have and the connections that are so important to other people and to important parts of our own identity are stored in the emotional centers of the brain in the limbic system. These are deeper parts of the brain. So much of our reality and our sense of self is made up of these connections to other people and to parts of ourselves, these things that we get attached to that are subject to change and loss as we go through the path of life. And when these core parts of our life are disrupted in a major loss or a painful life change, it takes time and a gradual process to recalibrate to the changed reality and to be able to move forward. As much as we might want to, we cannot think our way out of a major loss. It is only through the body-based and emotion-based processes of grieving that the parts of our brain that store our emotional memories and emotion-laden attachments, it's only through grieving that we can help those parts of the brain digest the loss and recalibrate to a new reality without the person or relationship or pet or part of our identity that we've lost. When grief and sadness arise in us, we feel it in our bodies. It often can come with a heaviness or crushing feeling in the chest, or a knot in our stomach, or exhaustion or physical aches in other parts of our bodies. And as the grief arises and comes even closer to the surface, we can feel a knot in our throat and a pressure behind the eyes that eventually gives way to tears. Grief comes in waves. It rises in intensity and we feel it so strongly, and it can feel overwhelming. And in its peak, we can weep uncontrollably and we may wail or otherwise just express the pure agony of what we're feeling in that moment. And although a wave of grief can feel really overwhelming in the moment, it's vital to know that waves of grief pass. They never last for more than a few minutes. And when they subside, we're left with a feeling of lightness or a sense of being in touch with a profound truth, something very deep and authentic within us that feels very profound and very revitalizing often. The other side of a wave of grief often brings us to a place of feeling open and clear and compassionate and relieved, even if we might also feel some exhaustion from going through the process of grieving. The process of grieving often has many waves, many layers that need to arise and move through us and be metabolized. And with each wave that we experience and let move through us, we shed a piece of the weight of this undigested pain or loss or suffering that we've been carrying, and can begin to see new options and new pathways forward. But it really can take time. Outside of the losses that I've named earlier, we can also experience deep grief when we recognize and come to terms with unmet needs that we've carried for a long time, or unmet longing that has just burned within us. If we faced a trauma or some kind of long-term suffering that we've carried, when we really come to terms with that and we feel witnessed in that suffering, it often leads to a spontaneous sense of grief. Sometimes this grief is so subtle we don't even know that we're carrying it. It can just be so part of our identity that it's invisible to us. But in the right conditions, especially when we feel safe and when we feel seen by a caring other, then the grief can unexpectedly come to the surface and begin to move through us and we can begin to shed layers of weight and stagnation and repressed energy of emotions that we didn't even know we were carrying. Some losses will never be fully healed. There are certain traumas and losses that we must bear as part of the path of our lives. But it's only through grieving that we can find a way to hold those losses and also find a sense of peace with them, and to find a way forward in our lives where we can find a sense of meaning and a sense of life being worthwhile despite the burdens that we may carry. We cannot bypass our grief without cutting off something vital in ourselves. There may have been a point earlier in our lives where we felt overwhelming grief and it was too painful, it was too intense, so we had to repress it, we had to dissociate from it. Or maybe based on our family or societal conditioning, we learned that it was not safe, it was not welcome to express grief and sadness, and it would only lead to rejection or humiliation or further pain. And so we learned to repress the feeling of grief that we carry about certain losses. But if grief is not processed and it lingers under the surface within us, then it will take a major toll on our lives. So what is this toll? First, we cannot numb or repress grief without also numbing our ability to feel the full spectrum of our emotions. Additionally, if we have repressed our grief, then our actions can be controlled by an unconscious fear that we're going to re-encounter that grief if we do certain things, and so we can end up limiting our lives without even realizing it. For example, let's say a person lost a parent at a tender age and they were never able to fully grieve that loss. In adulthood, they might find themselves avoiding romantic relationships or close connections with other people in their lives because unconsciously they fear that if they get close to someone, they might lose them too, and they would re-encounter the sense of undigested, agonizing grief inside of them that at one point in their life they determined they couldn't possibly handle. So it's only through gaining access to our own grief that may be laying dormant that we can begin to release the ways that it may have been pulling the strings of our lives in limiting ways that hold us back from having a full experience of life. While we may always carry the tenderness of significant losses, grieving allows us to come to terms with what has happened so we can move forward in our lives and not be limited or constricted by the blinders of unresolved loss. While most of this video we've talked about grief, the intense sadness that comes with a major loss, it's also important to talk about the other functions that sadness can have that can be a little less intense than pure grief. For example, outside of loss, sadness can also arise in response to feeling hurt in a relationship by another person. And sadness plays a really important role here too. In a relationship, sadness can signal to us that our needs aren't being met, or that we're not being treated in a way that feels okay to us. So sadness can help us understand our own needs, so we can make requests or make changes in relationships, or perhaps diversify the ways that our needs are met in our lives so we can feel better. Sometimes that sadness can also give rise to anger if we've been treated in some way that is telling us we need to set some boundaries in our relationships. In the case of being hurt by someone we're in a close relationship with, being in touch with our sadness and being able to express it to that person can open the door for empathy and connection and repair, and can help move the relationship forward, assuming that the person on the other end of the relationship who's receiving the sadness has the ability to care for your emotions and feel empathy for what you're experiencing. In general, sadness also signals to us that it would be a good time to reach out to caring, supportive others who can help us process what we're feeling. We are wired evolutionarily for co-regulation of our nervous system with other people. We need it as infants, and we need it as adults too. We need people who we can open up to and who can help us feel understood and seen and soothed in our emotional experience. It's hard to overstate how significant this process is, and can truly change everything when we can share our emotional experience with another person and feel held in it with them. It can open up entire new avenues of life experience and can help us release so many burdens when we can share our burdens with another person. Outside of getting support from caring and emotionally supportive people, it's also so useful to develop the capacity to care for our own sadness with compassion, with kindness, and with care. And it can be hard to develop that capacity. We're often not taught it, and we often internalize far more harsh ways of treating ourselves. But if over time we can cultivate the ability to recognize the tenderness of our own sadness and begin to respond to it like a good parent would, but we're responding to our own pain, that can also be so helpful in helping find emotional solid ground and helping feelings of sadness be understood and move through us. Well, that is it for this video. Overall, the takeaway is, if you know that grief and sadness have a really important purpose to play for your well-being, then when those feelings arise in you, you're going to be more likely to tolerate them and to sit with them and to process them with yourself and safe and caring other people. And you're going to be able to metabolize them. And you're not going to be as likely to repress them or numb them in a way that's going to cut off your own vitality and vibrancy in life. If this has been helpful for you, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.